UPL had operated for 3 months without the required regulatory permissions, and then the fire happened. So they hadn't operated for very long. But of course it is very unfortunate that they didn't have the required permissions, and of course the necessary risk assessment was not done. Because had that been done, in our opinion, UPL would have been defined as a major hazard institution. Now when an institution is defined in that manner, it means that should a fire or a flood or any other disaster take place, the response authorities would know that this is a hazard institution, and they would be able to respond appropriately in terms of hazard conditions.
UPL's operations then involved the unlawful storage of what we classify as dangerous goods. And it's important to understand that unlawful in the sense that they required certain permissions that they did not have before the fire. So the volumes of chemicals stored in that warehouse was significant, and it therefore triggered what we call in terms of NEMA and the EIA regulations a listed activity. And in order to commence with a listed activity, you need to obtain an environmental authorization from the KZN department, and prior to them actually giving you that authorization, you need to undergo what we call an environmental impact assessment. And so they needed to have done that, and that assessment would have then guided the authorities as to whether to issue the authorization or not, and whether to allow that storage of those chemicals to happen in that area, or whether the authorities might have said, not in that area, you can perhaps do it, but in a separate area. But none of that process was undertaken, which would have allowed us to do that. The next issue is around what we call the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the Major Hazard Installation Regulations. And there it appears from our preliminary investigation that they did not undertake that assessment that is required in order to declare them as a major hazard installation. But based on the fact that we understand what the volumes and the types of chemicals are, we had reasonable suspicion to conclude at that point that they were an MHI, and therefore there were certain regulatory provisions that they were then not in compliance with.
Let me say, Firstly, Minister, that we're delighted to have you and to publicly record our appreciation for the constant support, both politically, administratively, scientifically, that you've offered from the very beginning, and it's much, much appreciated. And I think when time to come, when we do a historical analysis, it would be an example of national, provincial and local government working together, and we must appreciate that.